One of the most common questions I get asked when first learning about gouache is how to lay the paint without the painting looking too flat or mixing too many muddy colors. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I paint a sunlit forest scene with scattered sunlight across the field using a photo reference that I took from my recent trip to my local Japanese gardens. Before we begin, I want to let you know that if you want to watch a complete unedited process video of this forest scene, then you can check out my new tutorial pack on my website. In the video, I take you along exactly how to paint this forest scene with scattered lighting in step-by-step format, what supplies I use, how I mix the colors, and how to layer the paint. This tutorial pack also includes a 30-page ebook companion, which details additional steps for you to improve your color theory and lighting skills. If you're looking for a fun but educational way to get into gouache painting, then this pack is for you. Without any further ado, let's get into this video. The first layer of paint that I began applying was a very wet consistency. This is 3 parts water to 1 part paint, roughly. I'm using a round brush 10 and I started by mixing the sky color with ultramarine blue, titanium white and a lot of water. Then I drew a horizon line with some darker colors to establish the distant trees in the background. I applied these colors quickly without waiting for the paint to dry, so some of the colors mixed together naturally, and when that dried they created some amazing textures as a base to work from. This first layer, extremely wet and watery, is meant to look messy, and I almost gave up on this painting thinking it was looking too saturated and too messy to work from. But I kept going and trusted the process and trusted in the fact that you can layer multiple times with gouache and fix mistakes, adjust colors however you wish, regardless of what the base is looking like at the first stages. I also did not draw a pencil sketch. I just went straight in with the paint and was drawing the basic shapes with the paint itself. I did do a pencil sketch to understand the values on the previous sketchbook page, but from the painting itself, I didn't do a base pencil sketch. And that's another thing I really love about gouache, is that you can draw with the paint itself. The goal for this first layer was simply to translate the reference that I see from the photo onto my sketchbook page using gouache paint, and that involved looking at which parts have light and which parts are in shadow, which parts will have a lot of detail like the foreground and which parts will have very little detail like the distant trees in the background. With this layer, I also wanted to establish the basic colors and shapes for any of the elements that I can see in the reference photo and that I want to keep in the painting, such as the distant trees, some of the sky, the grass of course, and some trees in the foreground and the rocks, which is going to be the focal point from what I can see in the reference photo. At this stage, the paint feels a lot more like watercolor instead of gouache. So if you want to do another wet layer below the first layer that you applied, that is perfectly fine, and that's exactly what I did here. I applied another layer of green once the previous layer dried. This is to establish those blurry leaves that I can see in the background. I don't want to paint each and every detail, especially not the details that I can see that's far away. You want to create a contrast of details. So some areas should be lighter on the eye and have very little details and brush strokes, while other areas should hold the viewer's interest and have more details. Once the base layers was completely dry, which took a few minutes, I went in with a much thicker mixture of paint, and this feels much like the creamy gouache consistency that we see a lot. This is 1 part paint and 1 part water, roughly equal. And now I started painting a little bit more details like the branches of the trees in the foreground using mid-tone colors. So this At this point, there is no shadows or light. Once I start detailing with a thicker paint, then I will apply lighter colors to establish the sunlight. Then I switched to a flat brush because I wanted to create more blocky brush strokes, especially for the rocks. I feel that creates a more delicious texture on rocks. So I use this flat brush and blocky colors first to paint a warm burnt sienna base color on the rocks that on the planes of the rocks that are facing the sunlight that will receive some of the bounce light from the grass and be lit up a warm color. And then I darkened and thickened the paint that I applied previously on the rocks, and that makes them stand out more. Another thing when painting with watercolor mediums such as gouache is having to wait in between layers for the paint to dry. So while the paint on the rocks was drying, I shifted my attention to the grassy fields and I started mixing transition colors to create softer edges between the light areas of the grass and the shadow areas of the grass. The reason I chose this photo as a reference to paint is because of the way the lighting was already quite dramatic, and I knew with the painting I could exaggerate the lighting even more. Something that I really love about painting dramatic light like this is the shadows and how shadows aren't really black or gray only. There's a lot of color in the shadow areas of a painting. So with these rocks, I applied another layer by mixing some of the sky color and the light brown color that I use on the light side of the rocks, and that created a light gray blue color that I used for the shadow side of the rocks that were facing the sky. In my first layer of painting, I completely forgot about painting the little path that's winding across the scene. So I just went in and added that. And this is another interesting point, is that with gouache, because it's an opaque medium, you can adjust and fix and paint over certain areas again and again, and there really is not it's not like watercolor where if you apply the paint it's hard to go back to the previous layer or fix a mistake or undo something. And that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy painting with gouache. It's a much more forgiving medium. Still using my flat brush, I'm starting to bring out the warm sunlight a bit more and push the contrast. I mixed a lighter color for the rocks that are in the light, very light brown using titanium white, yellow ochre, and a little bit of burnt sienna and Hansa yellow medium. And then I also applied some of this color to the light side of the tree bark and scattered lighting that might sift through the leaves of those trees in the distance. One of my favorite things about forest is just watching how the light dances through the leaves and then falls onto the bark and creates beautiful shapes. At this point, I felt like the background and the light side of this painting was uh, up to satisfaction for now. So, but I felt like the foreground and the shadow area needed a lot more work. And because the foreground will have the most amount of detail, I wanted to make sure that it was standing out properly. So I first darkened the foreground with another layer of dark green, transitioning using warm greens with spring green and yellow ochre and cascade green. And then as it was closer to the foreground, I mixed more cooler greens using ultramarine blue and viridian with cascade green. Painting is all about light, and light is all about temperature, warm tones, and cool tones. So, when painting, I always try to first, when noticing where the light is and where the shadow is, I also try to identify which colors will be warm, even only on the light side. Some colors are warm, some colors are cool, and even on the shadow side, some colors are warm and some colors are cool. Finally, I'm painting the last layer of details using a very thick consistency of paint. I'm using a small round brush 0, which holds very little water but a decent amount of paint, and so that ensures that I use more paint than water in the mixture. And I'm just applying the tiny details that I can see, flowers that's not in the reference, but in my tutorial pack you can find out how I use a reference photo creatively and add things that are not there. And this small brush also allows me to paint using the dry brush technique, which is what I use to paint a lot of the grass blades without having to paint each blade of grass individually, as well as the flowers, to create a texture on the petals instead of having to paint each petal individually. The flowers are white flowers, but I only use pure white, titanium white out of the tube to indicate flowers that are in the sunlight. But the flowers in the shadow, I use some of the sky color mixed with a little bit of yellow ochre to get a cool gray color. Lastly, I painted some ultramarine blue and titanium white to bring forward some of that sky color we lost after applying so many layers. And this is something else that I really love about gouache, is you can apply light layers, light colors over dark colors, and essentially paint light to dark. You can still paint a lot more details, but I decided to finish the painting here. And if you zoom in, you can see all the little details and tone shifts and all the fun that I had painting this little illustration. Again, if you would like to paint the scene on your own and watch an unedited real-time process, then check out the tutorial pack on my website. I also have a bunch more free resources and more tutorial packs about gouache, for beginners and for somebody who's more experienced but want to improve with the gouache. Yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time.